All right, what is up, everyone? I'm super excited because we are doing, I'm inviting Tim DiFrancesco to our, he's going to be there in just a second. All right, guys, this is a big week. Tim and I are celebrating the release of our new Run Strong program, and he's going to be joining me right now to talk a little bit more about strength training for runners. We're going to talk more about injury prevention. If you happen to be an injury-prone runner, you're definitely going to want to tune into this. And we're going to learn a little bit how Tim has taken his extraordinary knowledge from the gym and being the head strength and conditioning coach with the LA Lakers, and how he can apply that to runners so that we can stay healthy in the gym. Because look, guys, I hate that the injury rate among runners is like 60, 70% per year. Most of us are going to deal with some kind of injury this year, and I don't like that. I want you guys to stay healthy. I want all of us to stay healthy. So, all right. And I was just told that Tim is unable to join. I hope this isn't just going to be me on this IG Live. Oh, there he is.
What's happening, Jason? How are you, sir?
My man, how are you?
Doing great, doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk to you about a little bit more about strength training for runners, about injury prevention. I was just telling everyone on the live right now about your background with the LA Lakers, working with Kobe Bryant, and really helping a lot of those high intensity athletes to stay healthy over a pretty long season. I mean, I don't know how basketball players do it, but with runners, you know, our annual injury rate is like 60 per year, and that's awful. That is way too high for my liking as both a runner and a coach.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned on the Strength Running podcast a while back. And this is that 5+1 zone system that you have for identifying the problem areas among runners. And this is essentially what we built Run Strong around. And I think it's just a really excellent way of conceptualizing where our problem areas are and how to address that in the weight room so that we can actually stay healthy.
Yeah, so for me, it was just a matter of getting really tired of and just hating how many runners that I was working with that were coming in with these patterns of injuries, and how not only the frequency and the amount of injuries, but then really realizing that there was a pretty specific anatomical pattern where these injuries would often occur. And so I said, well, okay, let's try to put some rhyme or reason to this and kind of crack this code to see if, is there any way, knowing that one of the only tried and true ways to address and promote durability against injury is for the human body is to be able to load and strengthen the tissues in the area. So once I started to see this pattern of really what ended up being 6 zones of lower body breakdown or durability, whichever one, hopefully we're on the durability side there versus breakdown if we do this right. But I kind of was able to put a nice frame around that and a framework of a model of which we could then implement and target these areas. So we look at zone 1 as the plantar fascia Achilles calf, and so many runners have plantar fasciitis. You got it. They have that Achilles tendonitis and that nagging Achilles pain. And then there's a very high number of runners that end up with this sort of dosage-based calf strain. So it's not like a NFL or NBA player might get, where it's often like a hard push off and then there's an acute strain, but there's this chronic overload. Hey, the number of times that I have heard, I love running, I try to build up a habit of running, or I'm trying to get ready for a certain event, and after I get to mile 4 in every one of my training runs, my calf pulls. And so you have that zone 1, which is those 3 primarily soft tissue areas. Zone 2, going up the back of the leg, you have the hamstring. So runners listening and paying attention all have probably had either that high hamstring tendonitis up near kind of your sit bones, or you've had that mid to low hamstring tendonitis that is down around the back of the knee. And those hamstrings, you always get the advice, stretch them, stretch and rest those hamstrings, and that'll help. And it usually does help it go away, but then all of a sudden you go back to running and there it is again. So around the inside of the leg, you have zone 3. That is the adductor muscle group. I think that this is probably one of the most ignored muscle groups for runners in terms of training it and building its durability, and not really recognizing how much it's almost like a close cousin to the hamstrings. So if you think of the hamstrings as deceleration and acceleration and helping you to kind of be able to absorb but also propel in what you're doing, as you run, the adductors assist in that. And the adductors are also muscles that are more easily and readily loaded when you're going side to side, and runners tend to go straight ahead. They tend to do a lot of linear work. So that's often ignored, and you can get those groin strains, those adductor tendonitis issues and things like that. Then we go to zone 4, we have the hip flexors and the quads. I think for runners, it's very easy to recognize that having pistons for lower body, for legs, is quite beneficial and necessary. How do you create those pistons? You have to have strong hip flexors. And again, those are those top of the hip and kind of top of the quad, and where that meets your pelvis type of area, where it's often cranky, tight, sore. So we get the advice of, which it will help at first, we get that advice of stretch it, rest it, do those hip flexors, stretch your hip flexors. Well, the reason why they're tight and cranky oftentimes is because they're not strong enough. And you're asking them to be pistons as you do your running, and they're saying to you, hey, I want to do what you're asking me, but I'm telling you right now, you have to strengthen me to do that. And then they get cranky. So then we have the zone 5, we have the patellar, the quadricep tendon and the patellar tendons. The tendons are the ropey-like structure above and below the kneecap. Often for runners, especially as you're ramping up in mileage, you can get that anterior knee soreness. You can get sort of that around the patella kneecap soreness, and sometimes referred to as patellofemoral syndrome, things like that, can be really debilitating for a runner. And you're scratching your head wondering, okay, what am I supposed to do about this? Well, those tendons love to be strong. They love to be strengthened and feel strong, because that's what tendons are for. They're meant to be strong and springy to transmit and absorb and then conduct forces up and down the lower body. So those tendons need to be strengthened regularly. Again, not just stretched and rest. Now we have zone 6, and it's sort of that +1 zone. The reason I named it +1 was specifically for endurance athletes, specifically for runners. This is so common. The lateral line, as I call it, but the IT band. So you have a TFL muscle, tensor fascia latae muscle, that sits at the top of the lateral hip, and then that turns into this ropey structure that goes all the way down below the knee. And that IT band can be a real crux of derailing and the issue of derailing things for runners as they're just trying to enjoy their training or get ready for an event or during an event. And it can feel like there's an ice pick being jammed in the side of your leg and in your knee if you are not really strengthening that area. That zone in particular is, I almost never hear people being guided towards strengthening that zone. Again, runners do things straight ahead. They do a lot of linear work. They don't do that lateral work, and they almost never strengthen that lateral line, because most people's prescription and advice of strength or what to do with that is not about strength. It's get a foam roller, stretch it and foam roll it, and hope, put a hot pack on it, maybe hope that it's going to go away. And again, that is a tissue and a structure that must be strong. One of its main jobs is to help to propel. And you don't think of it because you think of quads, hamstrings, glutes. Those are the big horsepower muscles. But that IT band gets ignored so often. And runners, you don't have to suffer from that.
Oh, that's my injury of choice, Tim. When I overdo it, I am hurting my IT band. It seems, I think you just described all of my injuries over the years.
Right.
Thanks for putting me on blast a little bit. But I think one of the things that is very clear from talking to physical therapists and strength coaches like yourself is that this whole idea of resting a tissue and stretching it is not doing what we think it's doing from a recovery perspective. And if we have any kind of niggle, or if we simply want to prevent our next niggle from happening, especially if we're training really hard, we've got to think more in terms of loading the tissue rather than resting it, stretching it, engaging in all this static stretching. I'm curious, for everyone on the live feed right now, why don't you put in on the comments, comment your injury. I want to know what is your injury of choice. Mine's my IT band on my left side. I know a lot of folks have heard about my severe IT band injury a long time ago, and it's still something that I kind of struggle with today. And the only thing that really keeps it at bay is a very healthy dose of strength training. So I'm really glad that you've taken this runner-focused approach to strength training in the gym. And I think it's going to be helpful for almost any kind of injury you're dealing with, because a repetitive stress injury, which is the name of a running injury, that's the nature of them, they often respond really well to strength training because it's a loading problem. You've loaded your tissue too much because you've run too fast, you've run too far, and you've done it before you were fully adapted to your training level. And strength training helps bridge that gap. So I think what we've put together in Run Strong is one of the best approaches to keeping runners healthy and building this level of durability. I think durability is the name of the game for runners. I'm always saying, look, there's no magic workout, there's no secret sauce. However, if there was, it would be consistency. You can't do anything with your running career if you're not consistent first. And adding in some strength training so that we can prevent our next big injury, turn our next niggle into nothing, turn our next season-ending injury into just a niggle, so that we can just spend a lot more time running, which is what we love to do. And we're also going to become much better runners for it. So I want to talk a little bit more about Run Strong, which is our durability program for runners. And it's really designed to help prevent a lot of these issues, from IT band syndrome to calf problems. I know a lot of folks struggle with hip flexor issues. What is your approach to strength training in the gym for runners? I know we're going to focus on these zones. Talk a little bit more about the specifics of Run Strong. Is this, 18 workouts a week for 3 hours each? What's the time commitment that we're talking about here? And do folks need a gym membership, or if they have a good home gym, can they do this?
Yeah, great question. And so before I get into that, you brought up something that's really important. So not only are you going to be able to turn those, as you said, niggles into nothing, or the season ending injury into just a niggle, but also what I would say is by adding the proper resistance training and loading to these tissues and these structures regularly, you're going to, let's be honest, you may have, as you pointed out there, a little niggle creep up, but the severity of it, the intensity, and the how long it lasts can be significantly shortened by having resistance training, a bank of resistance training really topped off before that. So it's not that necessarily the goal is ever for any human doing anything to say, well, I'll never get injured. But when you get injured, when you have that thing creep up and come on, and maybe it's an old one coming out of, giving you a little PTSD, that kind of thing, but it's when you get injured, is it something that usually derails you for like 12 weeks and it becomes a fiasco and you're used to this whole merry-go-round of seeing a PT and stopping your running and doing that thing? Or have you built up your credits in your bank of resistance training to the point where, I felt that thing and it really only lasted for about 4 or 5 days. I got on top of it. I just added a little extra dose of that resistance training on at the moment too, but I had that bank built up and it barely lasted. I don't even remember the last time this thing was come and go like that. So I think that's really important too. But in terms of what to expect and what to be able to think about is enough to commit to resistance training, and what we tried to design in the Run Strong program for you, really, 2 to 3 days of anywhere from a 30 to, and sometimes even cases of 20 to 45, maximum 60 minutes of resistance training work if you wanted to do that. But again, the way we designed this program is so that you can work with it within your constraints, and it isn't a matter of more, an idea of more is necessarily better. It's a matter of what you brought up before. Whatever frequency, dosage, and overall sort of volume of work that is realistic for you, just be consistent with it. So in terms of being able, what to have access to, you having access to a gym is recommended. There are several exercises, and there are a number of exercises within this program that are probably ideal to be done with cable resistance, for instance, and things like that. But there's a lot of, there are also substitutions that you can make with bands. So you can absolutely get away with a very well stocked and equipped home gym if you have dumbbells, bands, and basic home gym equipment there. But it doesn't require a tremendous amount of extreme equipment or time. It just requires the consistency.
Yeah, and I just put in a link to the program in the comments and pinned it so folks can check it out. We are running a discount on it through Sunday, the 10th of December. Use code RUNSTRONG15. You'll save 15% on it if you want to check it out. So I really think this is a fantastic program for the beginner to intermediate runner. You know, if you're a 2:30 marathoner, the running plans might not be as complex as you need them to be. But for, you know, most runners, if you're comfortable at 20, 30, maybe about 40 miles per week, the running plans are going to match your ability level, plus all the gym workouts are going to be really fantastic at building that durability. And, you know, like we were talking about, I think this is like the most important part is we are essentially putting a dimmer switch on your next injury. You know, if it's would have been an 8 out of 10, we're going to try to make it a 4 out of 10. If that 3 out of 10 injury is going to pop up in a week, we want to make it a 0 or a 1 out of 10. It's almost just turning the dimmer switch down on all of these injuries so that you can train more and ultimately race faster. So I'm also really glad that you haven't planned 90-minute workouts, Tim, because I have to be honest, I don't love strength training, even though, I mean, look, I'm like a strength running guy. I'm always talking about the value of strength training. But look, I'm a runner through and through. I love running. I only really appreciate the value of strength training because it allows me to do more of what I love, which is running. So I just want to thank you for putting together a program that is time efficient for us runners, but at the same time is extraordinarily comprehensive. I mean, I think there are over 100 videos that you're going to have in your pocket that you're going to be able to implement in your training program so that you can build the running specific strength you need to ultimately stay healthy and also build more power and become more economical, all those wonderful benefits of strength training that we so love. Okay, so let's see. Wow, we have so many people on this live. I love it, but
let's go.
Let's go, guys. I want to open up the floor too for anyone that has questions about how to use strength training as an injury prevention tool that you have in your arsenal. So go ahead and leave a comment if you have one. And then also, you'll see that I pinned the link to the Run Strong program in the comments. You can also see it underneath this video and learn a little bit more about what we have going on.
Yeah, there's some great. I love that people are chiming in here. Some of the things that I'm seeing here on the lower leg in particular. I didn't highlight the anatomy, but the Run Strong program. So we look at I think Stephanie .923 said posterior tibialis tendonitis, so common, and that's gonna sort of be that inner on the inside of the lower leg there as that posterior tibialis tendon goes down around the inner ankle, and it is so common. There's a lot of forces being brought through that tendon, but again, the work on the calves and the lower legs. I always talk about ankles, foot, ankle, and that zone 1 that we talked about earlier as 360 degrees. So it's not just the underneath plantar fascia area, that posterior Achilles and the posterior calf. there's lateral and medial or inside outside aspects, and the anterior aspect, which covers another comment that I saw earlier on shin splints, where we see that commonly come up when people start to ramp up their mileage. And again, that one can be, for so long, even in my career as a clinician, as a physical therapist, strength coach, and athletic trainer, I always sort of hated to see that one come up for runners, because I was dreading having to tell them, look, the best I can really tell you is ice it and rest it. And being able to understand and get the experience and insights and research on the fact that, no, we can strengthen those areas that where you get those shin splints, and strengthen the muscles and the tissue around that area, and also bolster not only that directly, but also the stuff around it. So if you're getting shin splints really regularly, but your calves are not as strong as they need to be, your plantar fascia is a little bit soggy, your lateral muscles of your foot and ankles, many people probably have heard the perineals, those are not doing what they're supposed to do. Well, you might have medial inner shin splint type pain because those areas are not strong. So getting these things strong, we don't have to cross our fingers and just rest it and hope that it doesn't come back. This is a program where we can tackle it and be proactive instead of as much reactive work of just crossing our fingers after the fact.
Yeah, and for anyone that does have any kind of lower leg or calf problems, this is a problem that does seem to be a lot more common, particularly in masters runners. And just last month, I celebrated my 40th birthday. So now I'm in the Masters Club too. And it's something I'm thinking about, because I don't really have this huge history of calf problems, but I do have a history of lower leg issues. And I know that as I continue to get into my 40s, I'm probably going to have more and more problems in my calves if I'm not specifically targeting that area. And I think it's just a good general principle to remember that the older you get, the more care you have to take with your running to be able to keep doing it at a healthy, high level. So if you're injury prone, or you're getting to be a masters runner, or even a grandmasters runner, these are the principles that you really have to really take care to implement in your training. So we've got a couple of interesting questions here. So one question from Jay. He says, is running a very narrow elliptical as opposed to a straight line? I'm not sure it's more of a straight line. I mean, you're moving straight ahead, although within that movement, there are a lot of other forces at play. I mean, there's rotational forces, there's some forces, going side to side, some lateral forces like that. But overall, the movement is straight, forward. Part of the reason why we strength train, Tim, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to control those excess forces so that we're not flailing all around and have all these inefficient movement patterns. We can control some of those rotational movements, some of those, side to side lateral forces, so that we can put most of our energy into moving straight ahead, as opposed to just wasting it with all these wacky movement patterns that aren't actually helping us run faster.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, the easiest, quickest way to think of it, and what I always remind people is, if your inner and outer medial and lateral musculature and the tendons attached to those muscles were not there, or they were very, very, very atrophied and weak, you would have a hard time going in a straight line. So it keeps you efficient and effective, and it keeps your running economy high as you work to propel straight ahead.
Yeah. Tim, are you familiar with ankle pain, specifically the talus head? We have a runner who starts getting some pain there when he runs long, starting at about mile 11. This is a new one for me. What do you think?
Yeah, so that anterior kind of talus area, that's the joint is called the talocrural joint. You can have some pinching and some kind of sharp or sometimes dull and achy pain that is created in that area. And there's a couple things going on there. So sometimes, and I often find this, where the soft tissue laterally, medially, so outside, inside, and posteriorly. So we're talking about perineal muscles, that posterior tibialis muscle we talked about earlier. We're talking about calf and Achilles. if they're really not, think of a sailboat. So if the guide wires on a sailboat are weak and on slack, the sail cannot do what it's going to do. It's just going to flop around, and it's not going to be taut enough to do what it's going to do and send that sailboat where it's going to go. Same thing with the muscles and the tendons around the ankle. So the joint of the ankle itself, that talus and the talocrural joint, can really kind of begin to jam and create some impingement in that if the muscles around it and the guide wires of that are not really strong and tight and strong as they're supposed to be and springy. Again, that's what you want them to be. Too often, we're doing a ton of mobility work for something like this. So somebody just says, okay, here's 10 ankle mobility exercises. Okay, I'm with it. I want, and there's some nice ankle mobility and hip mobility and other mobility, flexibility exercises within our program, of course, because we're going to take a comprehensive approach. But if you just do the mobility and flexibility of the ankle, you actually may be exacerbating the issue there if you're not also adding the strengthening in around it.
Yeah, it's not just about flexibility or mobility. The most important thing is strength and actually loading that tissue.
Yeah.
We have a very interesting question from Will Woman Splain Shit to you. nice
Yes.
handle there. Does strength training improve heart rate zones? This is actually a really interesting question. I mean, so from my coaching as a running coach perspective, I will say not directly, but it can help. So in other words, strength training does improve your running economy. Now, your running economy is essentially a measure of how much oxygen you're using while you're running at a given pace. So you can essentially become stronger, improve your running economy, which lets you run the same pace while using a little bit less oxygen. That is going to lower your heart rate slightly. So you're definitely going to have a slight effect on lowering your heart rate at some speeds, because I think it's very helpful to know that there really are no weak, fast runners. Every fast runner also has a lot of very running specific strength,
Right.
and that helps them run so fast. It helps them run more economically. So strength training is definitely going to allow you to run more economically, which is going to slightly lower your heart rates at certain given speeds. And then the last thing I'll add on this topic is the fact that if you're more consistent, because you're more durable, you're going to be able to train more, which will improve your heart rate zones. So this is an area where, don't think you're going to get in the weight room for 4 weeks and then all of a sudden your zone 2 heart rate can now go up to 160 and you're just like this aerobic monster. It doesn't really work like that, but it is a piece of the puzzle and it's a necessary piece to the whole training recipe that we're putting together.
Yeah, perfectly said. I wouldn't have anything to add to it, but I love how you brought in the idea that maybe not directly, but indirectly, multiple ways, it's improving that and has a big impact on that. And yeah, I would just add that that's one of the beauties of this program that we designed. There are individual mileage, dosage, and volume prescription programs out there. There's individual resistance training programs out there. What I believe we've done is created the most comprehensive version of each of those and put those into one. That's what this is. It is all in one. And it's being able, so many injuries are, you could be doing all the right resistance training, for example, and if you are not dosing your mileage correctly, your volume of running work is off kilter, or just kind of throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks, or taking the more is better approach, that is a recipe for disaster. And that is a recipe for injury, because soft tissue injuries are typically, whether we're talking about NBA, NFL, running, anything, those injuries are created most often due to an increase in a drastic spike in the sport activity we're talking about. So, which the reality is you have to be able to withstand that. You have to be able to increase your work, but you can't do it so fast. So you have to understand how to gradually increase and when to do what, how much, and all that stuff. And then you have to have the strength and the durability built up and the tolerance built up to withstand when it is time to increase. So being able to put that into one, take the guesswork out for people, was really what we set out to do. Again, I just think back to our first conversation about this, maybe 2 years ago. I'd have to go back and look at when I was on your podcast the first time, but we just got so much and so many great responses from that conversation of people that were struggling with injury derailment in these 6 areas, in these 5+1 zones, and not really knowing exactly how to do the resistance training piece, but also admitting that, you know what, when I look back and I do an audit on my approach to either an event or just keeping my running habit going, I was kind of just guessing at how much would be the right amount.
I'm very fond of saying you can't strength train your way out of poor training, right? If you go from 20 miles a week
I
to
love it.
80 miles a week, it does not matter if you have Tim's brain downloaded into yours and you're doing exactly what you should be doing in the weight room, you're still going to get hurt. So obviously the number one injury prevention strategy for runners is just making sure that your training, your actual running, is structured properly. Good progressions, appropriate workouts. We're not doing anything too fast for your ability. So Tim, I want to wrap this up real soon, but before I do, there's just a couple more questions that I want to get to.
Yeah.
One of them is from Dennis. I'll leave this one to you. Is strength training the same as muscle building? Very good question, especially for endurance runners.
Really excellent question. So more times than not, when you build strength, you will increase the size of the muscle. However, there is strength that can be built without significant hypertrophy of the muscle. So if you were just going for build bigger size of the muscles, you may do that through more endurance-based resistance training work, and you're not necessarily going to increase your raw strength in that process. So bigger muscles do not always mean stronger muscles or more durable muscles. And there's different ways of getting to that. So in this program, we have designed it, obviously, for running specific purposes, knowing that this is not for bodybuilders. This is not a bodybuilder approach. You need to be able to build durability and strength in these areas. Believe it or not, and this is counter to what so many people recognize or believe, is building durability requires that you do lift things relatively heavy. When I say lift heavy things, that's relative to your starting strength, starting points. And so it doesn't mean that you ever lift more than you should be lifting in terms of weight or compromise your form to lift heavier weights. But I think that building that durability and strength does require that you get really good form as you lift heavier things. And so a bodybuilder approach, you might see medium type weights, but lifted many, many times and that kind of thing. So we have to, as you talked about earlier, we have to keep you stocked and fully loaded for your running. We want this program to make it so that you can enjoy your time logging the miles and in the races, in the events that you want to do. This is not to take away from that by any means. But yeah, that's a great distinction. Strength and size of muscle can vary and can differ based on the stimulus and then how we manipulate the variables as we do. I would also add that, and this gets into one of the really cool features that's in the program, runners don't necessarily always think of how important it is to have a very high functioning core, but it's critical because you have to remember that core is what keeps the pelvis and the torso and everything put together from top to bottom. And again, as you talk about running economy, if that center, if that core is not a cylinder and a strong unit all in one, and your hips and your core aren't working together, there's so many exercises in this program that really challenge your hips and your core to have to work in a symphony, as we call it. And so once you can develop that, suddenly the running economy, the fluidity of your actions out there, this is just added bonus in addition to the durability that you will build from this program. But building that core and that symphony between your hips and your core is so critical. We have a 5+1 plus core workout series that's in this program, where if you're not doing a full resistance training workout on a certain day, or you have a lighter running day and you want to get something in, you can get some of that great core work in, but we can also hit the top off those 5+1 zones of lower body durability. And I just think that so many times people runners, not just runners, but runners often fall probably victim to this, is we don't do enough direct loading, isolated loading of those particular areas. So we need some global work to get the hips and the core to be in a symphony. We need some isolated work in those 5+1 zones. There's specific 5+1 plus core workouts in there to tackle that as well.
I love the way your mind works, Tim. You're helping us runners be better athletes first,
Yeah.
which is going to make us much better runners at the end of the day. Okay, one more question before we end our live. This one is from Hyder. How do you space out strength training? How far from workouts or long runs, for example? Yeah, so maybe I'll tackle this one first and then we'll get your thoughts, Tim. I think the good news here is that you have options. There's really not one single best way to do it. I would say the more advanced, difficult option is actually to do your strength training workouts on your workout and long run day, because then you're keeping with this principle of polarity. We're polarizing our training. We're making our hard days hard, but then we're making our easy days easy. And by putting our strength workout on our running workout or our long run day, we are making those days very challenging. We're going to gain as much fitness and adaptations as possible on those days. But then the other easy recovery days, we're really not doing too much at all. There's not a high level of stress. So we can spend more time recovering, adapting, and really absorbing all that hard work. Now, you don't have to necessarily do the most difficult option there. I struggle personally with lifting after a long run. I'm just a little more depleted. I don't really have the energy for it. So what I like to do is actually just lift on my moderate days. I still keep my easy days very easy, so I'm getting recovery on a day off or a day where I might just be doing a couple miles at a very easy recovery effort. But on a more moderate running day, that's when I'll do my strength training. So I might have a base run the day after a workout, then I'll do my strength training on that day, or a base run, I will do my strength training on that day. So ultimately, let's just remember, you have options. You're not necessarily married to any one strategy. And I think at the end of the day, as a running coach, my primary goal for you is just to get in the strength training. Even if you do it on a day that isn't, perfect in some training theory sort of way, as long as you are strength training and feeling good day to day, I'm going to be very happy as a running coach, because you're building that durability, you're building that running economy and strength, and that's what's going to help your running.
Yeah, I would just, that's so great that you brought that up. And I would sort of give an anecdote from my time in the NBA and taking the same approach where the veteran, strong, durable, long career type of athletes that I had a chance to work with had one thing in common, which was they had early on in their career adopted this approach of when they would, first of all, they recognized the importance of resistance training early on. Then when would they do it? So in the course of like a runner, looking at the course of a week, 2 weeks as a 4-week span, it's like, where am I going to get this in? I've this many training days, I have to get this many miles by the end of the week. There's just not a lot of windows. Same with an NBA player. There's back-to-backs. You might have 4 games in a week. You travel, you have practices, you have extra skills work, all that stuff. So these players that had great long-lasting careers, they all tended to have this thing in common. Pau Gasol, Kobe Bryant, Steve Nash, they had this habit that they had put in place of lifting before games even. So whether you lift before or after a run is truly a preference thing. But as you brought up, Jason, you can really sort of be so tired after a medium to long run that it's like, it's easy, first of all, to self-negotiate at that moment and say, you know what, I'm going to skip the resistance training because you're so exhausted. But also if you do force yourself into it, you may not get as much out of the resistance training session at that moment right after a long run. So getting into a habit of using these strength building workouts and durability building workouts almost as a starter, something that kind of will trigger and turn systems on for you and get you ready for your run without depleting you. They're not so exhausting and so comprehensive and lengthy that you're just going to feel like, okay, well, now it's time to run and I've spent it all in the weight room. They're not like that. It's really about hit the right areas, the right amount, not too much, and get them ready. So you can absolutely lift and do this resistance training workout before your running bouts if it all lines up that way as well. But I love what your point was there. So many athletes, runners, or athletes of any sport and level tend to like sprinkle things out and spread them all out. So you never have a truly hard or a truly easy day. And so you lose the benefits of both of those things. So really being able to plan them out, that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to lay it out for you so you don't even have to do the thinking on it.
And using the strength training as a warm-up, I think works because these workouts aren't super long. You're not going to be in the gym for like an hour doing 35 different exercises. But we've also included different running warm-ups, both a low intensity and a higher intensity warm-up. So if you've got a workout, use the higher intensity warm-up. If you've got just an easy run or a long run and you can start slower and the demands on your body aren't going to be as high, you can certainly use the lower intensity warm-up. All right, so we're going to be leaving our IG Live here in just a second. Thanks to everyone for joining us. This was great. I love just hearing how you think about building injury resilience for runners because it's something that we need. Clearly, clearly with the injury rate as high as it is every year, we need this. And so, yeah, I really hope everyone checks out the program, Run Strong. There's a pinned comment under this video where you can see all the details. Tim's team put together a really fun hype video for it, so you guys should definitely go watch that. And if you're ready to take your strength training to the next level, if you're ready to build more durability into your program and have Tim's brain kind of downloaded onto your phone when you're in the gym, this is going to be the program for you. So Tim, thanks for spending some time with me today.
Thanks, Jason. I can't wait to get this out there and have more runners be out there running more.
All right, awesome. Well, let me know if you guys have any questions about Run Strong. My DMs are open. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. I'm sure Tim is too. If you want to reach out to Tim, if you have a little bit more of a strength training question for him, he's our resident strength expert. If you want to ask me any running questions, I'm here for you. But until then, good luck with your running and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it, Jason. Great stuff.
All right. Take care, guys.